What would you do if your forbidden love turned deadly? This is the chilling tale of Bisi, whose obsession led to a series of horrific crimes. Stay with us as we delve into a story of love, betrayal, and the ultimate price paid. She did 4 murders for her love. Bisi was a married woman, but her heart belonged to another man, Lawazi, her younger sister's fiancé. She had tried to ignore her feelings, but they only grew stronger with time. Bisi was desperate to be with Lawazi, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. First, she tried to get a divorce from her husband, but he refused to let her go. He loved her and didn't want to lose her. Bisi was trapped, and her desire for Lawazi only intensified. She tried to break up her sister and Lawazi, but they were deeply in love, and her attempts only drove them closer together. Bisi's obsession with Lawazi consumed her, and she began to plot and scheme to get rid of anyone who stood in her way. One day, she decided to take drastic action. She planned and executed the murder of her husband, making it look like a robbery gone wrong. The police investigated, but they couldn't find any leads, and the case went cold. Bisi's family was devastated by her husband's death, but they eventually began to heal. Bisi, however, was far from done. She had a new target in her sights: her parents. She planned and executed their murder as well, making it look like a burglary gone wrong. The police were baffled, and Bisi's sister was left alone and heartbroken. But Bisi wasn't finished yet. She had one more person to eliminate: her sister. She planned the perfect crime, making it look like her sister had taken revenge for their parents' murder. The police bought the story, and Bisi was finally free to be with Lawazi. She married him soon after, and they seemed like the perfect couple. But the police were still investigating the murders, and they began to suspect that Bisi was involved. They couldn't prove anything, but they were watching her. Meanwhile, Bisi's sister-in-law had forgiven her for her husband's murder and had even welcomed her into the family. But when she discovered that Bisi had married Lawazi, she was shocked and outraged. The police finally had the evidence they needed, and they arrested Bisi for the murders of her husband, parents, and sister. As she was led away in handcuffs, she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. Lawazi was devastated by Bisi's arrest and realized too late that he had been blind to her obsession and manipulation. He was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, wondering how he had let things go so far. And so, Bisi's reign of terror finally came to an end. But the damage had already been done. Her family was torn apart, and Lawazi was left to live with the guilt of having loved a murderer. As the trial began, the prosecution presented a solid case against Bisi, revealing the extent of her manipulation and deceit. The evidence mounted, and Bisi's defences began to crumble. Lawazi, who had once been so deeply in love with Bisi, was now a key witness against her. He testified about her obsession with him, her attempts to break up his engagement to her sister, and her eventual descent into violence. The jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Bisi was sentenced to life in prison. As she was led away in chains, she caught Lawazi's eye, and for a moment, they locked gazes. It was a fleeting moment of intensity, a reminder of the passion that had once driven her to such extremes. In the years that followed, Lawazi struggled to rebuild his life. He was haunted by the memories of Bisi's crimes and the realization that he had been so blind to her true nature. One day, he received a letter from Bisi in prison. She wrote of her regret, her sorrow, and her longing for him. She claimed to have found redemption in prison and begged for his forgiveness. Lawazi was torn. A part of him still loved Bisi, but another part of him was repulsed by her actions. He didn't know if he could ever forgive her, but he couldn't deny the hold she still had on him. And so he began to visit her in prison, hoping to find closure, hoping to understand what had driven her to such darkness. The visits were intense, emotional, and often painful, but Lawazi couldn't help himself. He was still drawn to Bisi, even in her broken state. As the years passed, Lawazi became a regular visitor to the prison, and Bisi's grip on him slowly began to loosen. He began to see her for what she truly was, a complex, flawed, and damaged individual. And eventually, he found the strength to let her go, to move on with his life, and to leave the darkness of their past behind. Lawazi finally broke free from Bisi's grasp. He began to rebuild his life. He started a new business, made new friends, and even started dating again. But the memories of Bisi and the pain she had caused him never fully went away. One day, while visiting his sister-in-law, he met a woman named Nneoma. She was kind, gentle, and had a warm smile. They struck up a conversation, and Lawazi found himself opening up to her in ways he never thought possible. Nneoma was a psychologist, and she had a deep understanding of the human mind. She listened intently as Lawazi shared his story, and she offered words of comfort and wisdom. Over time, Lawazi and Nneoma grew closer, and he found himself falling in love with her. She was the opposite of Bisi in every way, kind, caring, and genuine. As they started a new life together, Lawazi finally felt like he had found closure. He realized that he had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. But just as things were starting to look up, Bisi was released from prison on parole. She had served her time, and the authorities deemed her no longer a threat to society. Lawazi was shocked and terrified when he heard the news. He had thought he had finally escaped her grasp, but now she was back, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face her again. Nneoma sensed his unease and offered to support him through this difficult time. Together, they decided to confront Bisi once and for all, to put the past behind them and move on with their lives. The meeting was tense, but Lawazi stood firm, flanked by Nneoma's support. Bisi apologized for her past actions, but Lawazi knew it was too little, too late. With a newfound sense of strength, he told her that he had moved on, that he had found happiness with Nneoma, and that he never wanted to see her again. Bisi's face fell, but she nodded in understanding. For the first time, she realized the full extent of the pain she had caused, and she knew that she had lost Lawazi forever. And with that, Lawazi finally closed the door on his past, free to build a future with Nneoma, free from the shackles of Bisi's obsession and manipulation. But is this the end of Bisi's story, or just the beginning of her legacy of destruction? Stay tuned for part 2, where the aftermath unfolds and new revelations come to light. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping tales. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of Bisi's story.